Can you go to datatracker.org? Is it down for you too? I think it's
It
down.
was up. Yeah. Oh, no, not again. Oh, yep, now I got it.
Um, oh, there's Jay right there.
Don't even have a cache copy.
It doesn't help because this is what I get if I go to the direct link. I think you still need that.
Oh, yeah, because you can't log in.
You can't log in, so can't do.
We had this problem in LAMPS, one of the groups.
Yeah. Somebody answer the hotspot. All right. Documents available. Share slides. Selection.
Oh, you got it?
All righty. Okay, welcome to the working group chairs. Yeah, so welcome to the Working Group Chairs Forum. Do I hear? At IETF 1, this is the note well, which you all will be familiar with. If you have any questions, please talk to the IETF leadership. By the way, I'm using the slides that that Greg has prepared as the default slides. So if you've always wondered what those default slides are, they're up on the chairs.ietf.org wiki. So that's what this set of slides is. This is the note really well. And here's your meeting tips. And I'm rushing through these, although the lawyers advised us not to rush through them because I'm a little bit late getting started. And finally, this is our agenda for today. So we will move on to the very first item, which is Jay Daly. Any bashing? No. Oh, and I do need a note taker. Are there any volunteers for note taking, please? Oh, excellent. Thank you, Drove. So moving on, we will switch to Jay. I haven't set up this yet, so
Sorry?
I haven't set this up yet because I was focused on slides.
Okay. Do you think it'll work? Or?
It might. We'll see.
Oh,
You can start. If it doesn't work, I'll forward it for you.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Jay Daly, the IETF Executive Director, for those that don't know me. Before I start on this subject, I'll just update you on two things that were raised at the last working group chair session in in Vancouver. One of them was about the Notewell, and the lawyers are working on a full review of Notewell as to when people are shown it, what is said when it's shown, how long it needs to be shown for, when people sign it off, all of those kind of things. When they have some recommendations, and I'll report back on that, and we can discuss that, because I know a number of you had questions last time about whether we need to show it quite so often. Does it matter if people have ticked to specifically accept it when they register for the meeting, that we then need to continue showing it through the meeting, and all of those things, okay? The second thing was at the last meeting, there were some discussions about IPR disclosures and orphaned IP. And I have gone through and reviewed that and recommend to the IESG there's nothing to do there. So there were one or two people, I think, who wanted to see something a bit different, but the majority of people wanted no change. It was just a matter of understanding the processes a bit better around working group chairs training. So I'm not expecting anything necessarily to come of that. So that's where we're on those things. So I'm now going to move on to working group surveys, unless there's any particular questions. No? Great, let's see if this works. Yes, it does. Right, so I'm here at the request of the IESG to talk about working group surveys. The IESG wants better information about working groups. It has good overall information from the annual community survey, but not at the working group level. And so is now considering 2 new surveys. And that's the reason I'm doing it, because I'd be running the surveys and things for them. So the 2 surveys are, first of all, a per working group survey to get working group participants' view on the performance of each working group and how they engage with each working group. This would be in a way so that the results could be comparable to the annual community survey result and to each other, so that, you know, outliers could be identified. Then, and I'm going to go through that in detail, that survey, in a minute. And then the second one is a survey of working group chairs as a cohort to understand your level of knowledge, expertise in various aspects of chairing, the personal impact of being a chair, and your attitudes towards chairing. And that's intended to get, you know, answers from the working group chairs as a cohort. Now, none of this is intended to be about performance management or anything, but inevitably, when you ask questions about how well do you think things are doing, you get answers that people can then extrapolate to that from. So this is not intended to be that, but could still possibly, you know, be considered by some as something along those lines. So this is really a question for you about your comfort around these as we go forward. So the per working group survey, this is proposed to be a very simple one to get these 2 things. what working groups think about the performance of the working group across a range of different characteristics, and what they think about their personal engagement with the working group. No direct questions about the performance of working group chairs, either collectively or individually. And we need to design this in a particular way. Many people are active in many different working groups, so we need a short survey. We need it efficient so that people can answer, possibly 10 or something number of times. We don't want to ask them to repeat the same answers. And we need to enable people to prioritise so that they can answer for the ones they think are important, and if necessary, just not answer for the others. So the proposed distribution is a unique link generated for each working group and sent directly to that working group list. So it has 3 questions in total, that's all, and this is the general approach to the questions. Firstly, no demographics. Now that's partly because some demographic slices would be too small, such as age ranges, and therefore you can't use them because you can risk de-anonymization. And also because we don't want to ask people to repeat the same answers per working group, so it's unnecessary. We're looking at one question which is a standard type of participant question, where people self-select between one of these things. There's a textual prompt, which I'll show you in a minute. And that's necessary to help understand the quality of response you're getting, whether you're getting it from a regular participant in the working group or whether you're getting it from somebody who hasn't participated much in a few years. And then there are 2 questions from the community survey, but just slightly adapted so that they are specific to a working group. And that's the plan so far, but if there's anything else that needs to be added, please speak up and discuss in a second. So I'll go through those questions now. So this is the first one. How would you best describe your participation in the XXX working group? And these are the prompts, and that's what helps us understand whether somebody is a regular participant or really isn't that interested in things. And that I think is going to be important because I think some of you will be, want to know what different people think across that one slice. Then the first question is this question from the annual community survey. So how true are the following statements about so-and-so working group? And people answer on a Likert scale from almost always to almost never, a 5-point scale. And these are the points. This working group has goals that are appropriate and realistic. This working group meets its goals. You can read the rest, but these are the standard things that we ask about working groups in the annual community survey. So, as explained, this is about perceptions of the overall sort of performance of the working group. And when we get this, we can, first of all, compare to the average results we get in the community survey, and we can compare against all of the others and the average of all of these. Now, because I've got quite a lot to go through, if anybody wants to jump in at any point on one of these questions, please do. Otherwise, I'll carry on talking and also have questions at the end. Okay? And someone's jumping in. Lovely. Leslie.
Hi, Leslie Daigle. Sorry. I just wondered on the question about the working group participation, are you going to normalize that for the level of traffic in the group? Because MOPS is pretty quiet overall, so I expect everyone will say we're really quiet overall.
Okay, so not going to normalize it for it, but when these results are presented or provided, then indicators will go alongside it to give, that sort of data so that people understand. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Jeffrey?
So I wanted to encourage you to actually gather the demographic information, although I realize that you absolutely should not summarize it back to the chairs. The motivation for doing that as meta-analysis across all the working groups is literally targeted at the other slides that you're presenting. What is the quality that's perceived, and whether the working group is covering its goals or not. And what I would expect to be able to be mined out of the demographic data correlating against those two is things like, as an example, if I'm an ex-participant, is that somebody that's trended older, or is it new people that just simply are not finding value in IETF? So the meta-analysis is what I think will get value out of that.
So that's something that we attempt to do from the annual community survey as a whole, so that we can see whether we have particular trends in people who leave the IETF or people who are new participants. Is that, I mean, my view is that that's sufficient. Are you suggesting we need to do that down at the working group level as well?
I do think it's necessary at the working group level. You know, as an example, chartering has been a interesting topic the last couple IETFs, and part of what I am sort of curious to see is we know that graying is a population. We know that participation is very uneven. We know our participation is heavily chair weighted. What I'm sort of curious to see is, you know, across the slices of the spectrum that are not those things, you know, what sort of participation and what kind of participation are we getting, you know, from the various demographics.
Yeah, at a per working group level. Yeah.
At a per working group level. So just to pick on myself, you know, in IDR, you know, we have very few newish people that are doing things. I make it a particular point within my own employer to, you know, try to encourage some of our younger developers to get involved in IETF at the process level, mostly, you know, draft at a time. Getting traction to get deeper involvement in IETF has been a challenge. What the demographics would show off of them is that you know, their participation is casual, but they're younger. Where I think this is valuable for IETF as a whole is that we're looking at sort of the onboarding process. How do we actually get people more deeply involved other than like a single document at a time?
Okay, we can take it offline, Jeffrey, because I still don't understand the need for a per working group element to that. I think we'll take too much time if we try to discuss it now, but I'll have the conversation with you. And I'll go back also just to mention my concern is that the numbers are too small to get anything accurate around demographics. But it is, I'm not ruling it out, just for discussion.
I'll happily take the list. What I do suggest, though, is I absolutely agree with you. We should not provide the statistics for the demographics to and the per working group level to the chairs, but it should be available for a meta-analysis. So by direct analogy, the IETF one that you're gathering is across all of IETF. You don't have at the IETF level per working group no slices of that. That's the slice that I'm suggesting is missing.
Okay, thank you. Carsten?
Just a moment. I think this slide is really interesting because it's extremely surprising to me. You seem to assume that people who follow a working group perceive themselves as working group members and think about the working group as such. I would like to offer that most people I know are in working groups for the documents that's in there. They don't care about the working group, they care about the documents proceeding. And then maybe after 5 years or so, they might develop an interest in the working group. So asking these questions for a large number of people, this is not something they have thought about. It's not their working group, it's their document maybe, or the document they're interested in that happens to be in a working group, but they don't care about the working group. So they aren't even going to tell you whether the processing of that other document was fair in any way or something. So that's really very surprising.
Okay, thank you. Rob?
So one question I think for me that's most interesting about working group is it making good progress? And you can sort of tease that out from the questions there, but it might be worth asking that sort of most as an explicit question.
More specific, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so the second and final question about work. Oh, Taurus, were you going to previous one?
Yeah, thank you. So in my experiences in the past with similar type of performance measurements, so to speak, if that's a fair term, one of the big issues is that they very easily tend to attract decision making based on people who hold grudges, right? So I've seen that in non-com, and in the industry where we've been doing a lot of performance evaluations as well. It ended up focusing on superficial aspects like, you know, was it a good entertainment value here, or did you learn something, right? So I'm really questioning, you know, that we start from what explicitly are the goals and revisit, you know, the questions and how much of that can be achieved, right? Because working groups are so far different in size, complexity of the goal, involvement of, you know, industry conflicts within the group, right? So it's, you know, these type of unified questionnaires, right, make it very easy to fall into the trap of starting to compare things, which very often I don't think is possible across the different working groups.
Okay, I understand that concern in general. I think if you look at the specific points here in the question, the intent is to compartmentalize those so that clearly, yes, you will get some biases, and clearly you will get some people who are just coming along to be awkward. But it's much more difficult to do that in this type of construct than if you're simply asking basic performance questions about things. And I think you have the trade-off about whether you have zero information or whether you have information that has the risk of bias. Daniel?
Daniel Gilmore. First off, I salute your work in doing this. I think we need to ask questions, and having some information is better than no information. That said, I think I have the opposite concern from the previous speaker, which is that I think you're going to have a selection bias just because who are we asking these questions of? The people who answer no or disagree with these sorts of statements often have left the working group already and have decided it's not worth their time and that they're going to go do something else with their time. And you're not going to, you know, some people may leave the working group because they feel like it's dragging on too long. Some people may leave because they feel like it's unfair or it's abusive. And I don't know how you're going to ask those folks who have left these questions.
So there are two things there. One is that there's a degree to which you can capture that by repeating the same survey year after year. You can't fully capture those that have left. But the second thing is that we are experimenting with non-returners surveys. So we have a survey out at the moment for all the people that came to an IETF meeting, I forget which one, and have not been to the last 3 or 4 IETF meetings, asking them, why haven't you come back, basically. And so I agree with you that this leaves that gap of people who've gone, and you know, you can perhaps see some of those stats if you do this over a number of years, but we would need to find some other mechanism to capture that, yes.
Okay. So in terms of looking at it over a number of years, that's an interesting project as well, like a longitudinal study. Are you linking the participants' identities across time then?
I'm not thinking longitudinal, so it's not the same people being tracked across time, no. It is simply the working group being tracked across time, to understand that. And then there are other statistics or other data that we can provide about the number of subscribers to the mailing list, churn of people within that mailing list and other things, number of messages sent by different people and things, that together, you know, can be somebody you can use to interpret that.
Okay, that's challenging analysis, but
It is,
I appreciate you're doing this.
Yeah, no, and I'm not pretending I'm going to be evaluating that. I'm simply trying to collect the data and provide it for IESG. Colin.
Hi, Colin Perkins. So I'd like to sort of echo some of these comments about bias.
Yeah.
You know, as a professor, obviously we ask these types of questions and to our students and get evaluated on them. And while one hopes IETF participants are more mature than undergraduate students, one of the concerns we see is that there is a very strong bias against particular demographics of people. And for example, the female staff we have gets rated much more harshly than the male staff. And if those things are going to play out here, we need to be very careful when we're evaluating them to make sure those biases against particular demographics of chairs don't get
I agree.
into the data. So be very careful how it's interpreted.
I agree. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So moving on. So this is the final one about the statements about this, the working group, and this is about individual perceptions of their personal engagement. Again, on a Likert scale from almost always to almost never. This working group is a good use of my time. I'm able to share my views in this working group. My contributions to this working group are valued, and other things there. And again, this is similar to exactly the same as the annual community survey question in that way. So that's the first survey. Anything else about that survey before I then move on? And you can also, as well as giving me this feedback here, give it directly to the IESG, about that, and not copy me in, that's fine. To the IESG only list if you wish, certainly. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next one then, which is the survey of working group chairs. So this is a survey sent to you, each of you, as a cohort. So this is to understand your level of knowledge and expertise in various aspects of chairing, the personal impact of being a chair, and your attitudes towards chairing. So I'm not interested in what you think about your working groups. This isn't the part about it, it's about you as a group. And given that each of you only does this once, and we would hope it's important to you, this can be a medium-length survey, up to 10 minutes to complete. And the intention is to, or the proposal, sorry, I better put it that way, is to send this by direct email to each working group chair, with security in place to ensure that the link can only be used once, but in anonymous mode. So there's no data that we're associating with the link that is sent to you. So that we're not collecting, so that you can be entirely honest as you wish about it. So first of all, we will start off with some demographic questions. Region, age, gender, employment status, and possibly employment sector, which is the one that we also use in our community survey. This is to give an understanding of you, working group chairs as a whole, and to understand, representation in air quotes of the community. We could potentially get this in some other ways, but this is entirely anonymous, less obtrusive way perhaps of doing it than other ways to do that, than, for example, asking you all to enter this into Data Tracker or something, and a confidential way of doing it as well. And then, so then we have role questions. We again could extract this from Data Tracker, but as we're running this anonymously, we can't. And anyway, Data Tracker has limited information. Anything further than 12 years is questionable. And so how many working groups you're currently a chair of, how many working groups in total have you been a chair of, including those you are currently a chair of, and in what year did you become a working group chair for the very first time? Now, these are on the interesting end of things, not necessary end of things, so these could easily be dropped if required. Then we're on to on-site participation questions. Now, this is something that the IESG has been discussing and asking about, which is about understanding on-site participation at IETF meetings to, for example, to get a baseline of on-site participation that can then be used when assessing other contexts. For example, the discussion about the meeting in China, IETF 125, whether that goes ahead in China, where a baseline would have been helpful there. So this is a very simple question. I aim to participate on site at some and rarely never. And this enables free text as well, because there are only a couple of hundred of you, so it's possible to read a couple of hundred comments and take things from them. And then understanding funding of chairs as well for on-site participation. As you know, we have a small number of on-site fee waivers available that are at the discretion of the IETF chair and the IRTF chair. And increasingly, those are being requested by working group chairs. And so this is to understand, over a period of time, funding requirements, other things around working group chairs. Right, self-assessment question. How do people rate your performance in the following areas of chairing of working groups? We had a long discussion about whether or not this should be a skills-focused one. How do you rate your skills in these areas? But I think it's better to come out with people about how you feel you're doing about these things. That may not necessarily be particularly comparable, given the way that some of you are likely to have different views about your own behaviour. Set yourself different standards from other people. But anyway, here, the point about this is to help identify gaps. It's not to help, say, all our chairs are awful, calling consensus. Rob.
My question was actually, on the previous slide. So you had, in terms of attending the meetings, every, some, and not many. And I was saying, actually, I'd potentially answer like most, which isn't necessarily every meeting, and some might be too few. So I don't know if that's a...
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine. I think there are a number of people actually who are in the most category, so you're right, that's probably better to ask that, yeah. Okay, so the self-assessment question, this is, of all of the ones, this is probably the one that is for most discussion and most potential impact. Does anybody have any views about this one? Okay, I'll move forwards. We can always come back to it. So then some personal impact and support questions. How do you rate the following personal aspects of being a working group chair? Total workload, personal satisfaction, and commitment to continuing. We can add more to that. That's just, a small set, but if you think it's more important to things about you want to talk about the impact on you and other things, we can do that. Rich?
Is this aggregate across all the working groups that someone chairs, or the different survey for each group?
No, this is per chair. So each chair get this, and the results are only presented as an aggregate across all working group chairs.
No, I understand that part. But for example, in the security area in particular, we have many people who chair multiple working groups.
Yes, that's right. No, so this is your total workload as a working group chair. I can adjust the text if necessary, across all of the working groups that you are responsible for again. Okay, got that. Thanks. Rob?
In terms of total workload, it would be worth asking in terms of like hours per week or something rather than that category.
Well, so we have this is on a Likert scale of excellent, good, average, poor, very poor, and no opinion. The intent being that we don't know how many hours per week somebody can commit, feels good with, or anything. What we want to know is the impact of those hours. And so that's why we're not asking hours. That's why it's asking it on that type of scale.
Fine, okay.
Okay, yeah. Tullus?
Yeah, I can only imagine how to do that if I had more than one working group, but I think it might be a lot easier if you get, an invitation for each of the working groups, because normalizing that across different working groups seems to be very difficult.
Okay.
I mean, I just started out thinking if you go back to that slide, the self-assessment, for me, all of these have, in different working groups, totally different levels of complexity, right? So kind of, I'd say, how difficult is it in your working group to call consensus, right? So could be very simple, could be very hard. And only when I kind of have said, oh, this is very hard and yeah, I'm doing only a fair job. Or on the other hand, oh, that's totally simple and I'm doing an excellent job, but it's really a simple job, right? So that's why maybe, for each of these questions, you want to ask how difficult is that in your working group?
Okay.
And then you can do the self-assessment, how well you're doing within that level of difficulty.
Okay, thank you. That's very useful. If anybody disagrees with that, please let me know, because now I've heard that from two people, I'll be looking at that. And the big question, of course, then is anonymity around that, whether, it should be for this specific working group, do you, please answer this, or whether it should be like, just give me a number, how many working groups you chair, 1, 2, 3, and I ask you the question for 1, 2, and 3, something like that. Colin?
Yeah, if you can go back to the other slide. Yes, I would certainly agree that the answers differ wildly for different working groups.
Right.
As a nit, I'm not quite sure how I would describe it. What an excellent workload would be. So would I argue that maybe heavy to light or something like that would be a better phrasing.
Yeah, okay. I think perhaps if I change the prompt to be the impact on you of your workload, something like that. Sorry, closer to the microphone. That this is meant to be something that is about you personally and how you manage the workload and what it means for you, rather than any form of objective assessment of what that workload is.
No, sure, and I get that. I just find that the particular labels don't really fit with how I would describe a workload.
Okay.
I would describe my workload as heavy or light or appropriate, but not excellent or poor.
Okay.
So,
Right. No, I understand. No. Okay.
The main thing I came up to say, support for the following sources and people. You may want to add things like document authors or the other members of the working group, because the chairs may think that the authors are not being supportive of their group.
Great. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Hi, Lou Berger. I think that responding to that last comment about checking with different people, I think that's about what information you want to gather. And so I think it's good to be clear what information you want to gather and make sure your questions line up with that. That's not why I came to the mic. I came to the mic to talk about multiple working groups. For some of these questions, it's certainly different. Having chaired multiple working groups at the same time and over time, sometimes it's quite different, but for other questions, it's exactly the same. And so if you're going to ask for a working group, please allow a checkbox that says same for all.
Right. Okay.
Just so we don't have that extra work or sit here and debate which ones apply to which.
Sure. Yeah.
The other thing is you might consider pulling about X working group chairs. Why did they leave? And that might give you some useful information.
So I have considered that. I think that would be a separate set of questions. So, but yes, that is something the ISG have discussed, definitely. Yeah.
I think it would be nice if you included it, because then I don't have to do multiple surveys. Thanks.
You mean ask you as a current chair about things that you stopped being a chair of?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
It'd be nice if it's an integrated survey, but
Yeah.
Sure.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Thank you.
Oops.
Stop. Hold on a second.
Drew, sorry.
Yeah, hi, just one question. I think it ties back to how you are going to run the survey. Is it going to be an individual link going to all the working group chairs? Why it came to my mind is if you publish this in this particular working group chairs list, this includes research group.
No.
This includes secretaries as well.
No, it'll go to individually to each working group chair with, I haven't sorted out the details of the security yet, but some mechanism to ensure that only working group chairs answer it and only answer it once.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Right. So moving on then, two sets of questions about knowledge and training. The first one is, how do you rate your knowledge of the following subjects and websites? This is quite a lengthy one. This is perhaps one of the most important ones to ask as well. It's an entirely new, entirely new question from anything we've asked before in any other way. Then we have another question, which is about the tools used. Mailman 3, Data Tracker, and MeetEcho. And on the previous one, we also have asked about the working group chairs wiki, and we could move that across to the tools if that's required. These things can be split as necessary. And so that's to get the baseline of people, what people think their knowledge is of things. And then the second one is then about prioritizing subjects for chairs training. And this is a set of subjects that have come from various discussions. If you think there are others that could be put here that are more important, or some that could go, please let me know. And then, of course, the free text bit for you to be able to specify other things for training. And so with the combination of those over time, we should be able to get to understand whether training is useful and tackling the areas that you think it needs to tackle. So that's that for that last survey. I'll go back to the training bits. Any questions? Other questions?
Not about training bit per se, but are we asking which area each working group is responding for? Because area-wise, combination of data would be very useful, I guess, like a particular area together feeling like, how do I consolidate all these outputs based on security area versus routing area?
We could do that. So,
Yeah.
yes, so there are two approaches, one of which is we ask you to put in your area of all different working groups. Some of you, I presume, are across different working groups. Yes, it is possible to do that. The other way is that we don't have the anonymity bit, and that there are a set of data attributes that are associated with the link that is sent to you, which we've only done once before, which is for the IETF 125 survey. We don't normally do that, but that is possible if you're comfortable with that. Right. Colin?
Hi, Colin Perkins. So I think this is a good set of questions and subjects for training. With the exception of the last one, they're all very focused in how your working group works.
Yep.
There's possibly another set of questions about how you engage with the IESG.
Okay. Do you mean in terms of for chairs training, or do you mean in terms of the, sorry, it's not working, in terms of this stuff here, things you know?
Yeah, I was mostly thinking in terms of training. 'Cause
Training, right.
They're all about how you manage your group, but there's how you manage how you manage down as a chair. There's also how you manage up.
Right, okay. Thank you. Thanks. Rob?
I just had a comment on like Drew's question actually, in terms of anonymity and when you specify. I think it'd be quite nice to have it like an option to specify your area rather than lose the anonymity, because you may find some people decide not to fill in the survey. They feel like they're going to be anonymized. So given that flexibility would then allow people to still fill it in completely anonymously, but potentially provide it later.
I think I'd like to leave as few uncertainties as possible, as I've got so many of you here. If there are any of you who have strong views about anonymity, it'd be nice to know that so that we build around it, because I am assuming that's the case. But if actually you're all like, no, don't worry, we trust you, that's fine, then that changes the nature of the way we do things.
I don't care.
Right, thanks, Rob.
Magnus Westlund. One thing I realized here that you might be interested in asking is about the chairs, how they feel about how experienced they feel about cooperating with other SDOs, 3DP, IEEE, etc., and the procedures around those.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Anybody have anything else? No?
Nope,
Great.
nobody else in the queue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh.
Drew, yeah.
Within working groups, there have been times where people have asked the questions is like, how do we operate? And it's sometimes very difficult for chairs to judge whether we moving things, for instance, GitHub, where are we? There are always some people who are very happy with it. There are people who always complain. And in most cases, it's like sometimes chairs have made a decision and they have gone ahead with it. And each working group is doing things sort of differently. I know it's kind of difficult to ask that question because we want to limit the questions in the first survey. This is more about the first survey rather than the second one. But just think if it's possible for us to answer those meta questions that have been running around for a while.
It is certainly possible to add another question to the first survey. It's relatively short and quick. And to add another question about things that chairs would like to know. Yeah, certainly possible to do.
I'll think a little
please
bit
send me
more.
Suggestions. Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, I don't know enough to know to provide any sort of proposal. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Jay.
Thanks.
All right, Tim.
Yep.
Just before you get started, we do have a hard stop at 12:45.
Oh yeah, and if we run out of time, we can just skip the presentation. I can just talk for a few minutes, kind of thing, because Jay's talk literally kind of dumps into sort of the stuff we've been thinking about in DNSOP, right? As chairs,
Okay.
how do we present stuff transparently? How do we sort of work through all the stuff with the working group and stuff? So this really does tie in. So it's all your call, Karen.
All right. Well, I think you can go ahead and go. We got about 10,
Okay.
12 minutes.
Okay, I can. Yep, this is short, folks. So we can go next slide. Looks like I have control. I'm Tim Wasinski. I'm one of the chairs in DNSOP. I've been doing it for a while with Benno Ovenreiter and Suzanne Wolf. And it's a pretty busy working group. So if we go to the next slide, we're a little different because we've been around forever, and we usually have a dozen documents adopted in flight. And we also we talk to all the other DNS groups in the IETF pretty regularly. And there's like 4 or 5 now. So we sort of keep pretty busy. And if we go to the next slide, one of the things we try to do is be super transparent with the working group as to how we make decisions and sort of how we prioritize work. And sort of get feedback from folks. And with 3 chairs and an AD, it gets kind of busy. It gets confusing who sometimes is in charge, right? Who sort of signed up to do something and then we forgot because we got jobs and stuff. And then of course we run into like the work we're doing is on uncharted arguments, and which we try to sort of sort out and try to keep them at a minimum. And so in the next slide, we've tried various processes to do this, and everything's not kind of worked. And I love using the data tracker, but a lot of the data tracker stuff that like Warren was showing us at the AD level doesn't work at the working group chair level, right? So it's especially some of the action holder type things. So if we go to the next slide, what we kind of came up with, when we try to add stuff to the data tracker, like, oh, here's a discussion point, it ends up in the history, but most folks don't look at the history tab when you're looking at documents and stuff. And so that makes it sort of hard to find. So on the next slide, we kind of fiddled around with this. Area directors have this nice action holder button, which is very obvious in the data tracker to people who look at it, like who's in charge, who's doing what. And that's good for authors as well. And so would that work if we had something for the working group chairs? And I know I've talked to Robert about this, but he asked me some questions I didn't actually kind of have answers for. So he kind of stumped me. Next slide. So we played around with this, and then we came up with basically, since we use GitHub, and this goes into, because there was a lot of suggestions to use that, the work group seems happy using it as well as the data tracker. We just have a document tracker that basically tracks all the issues with all the documents. And if you go to the next slide, I think we have an example here. Yep. So it basically is all the documents, where we think things are. We put labels on them, who's holding what. We assign them to various chairs or to Warren, see where things are going. And you'll see some other things. And then, of course, this ends up in the GitHub weekly email update, right? So it sends to DNSOP every week, and people can see what's happening, on a weekly basis. Next slide. We also did this thing where we since the charter has basically, numbers for items, we basically can tag all our documents for, with like, where's it relevant in our charter work? And that makes it very obvious for folks to kind of go look at and say, okay, this is where and this is kind of a useful thing too. I just don't know how to sort of show that in the data tracker. Next slide. And a lot of this is really for really busy working groups, right? And there are some busy working groups out there. The HCP groups are pretty busy. There's some security groups that get a lot of stuff going on. And we really want to hear from other busy working groups. So next slide. And I know I poked around, and like the HCP groups use a lot of the projects tracker stuff in GitHub. And that makes sense for them because they're also sort of tied with the W3C, right? And so, it's a more neutral platform. And so that looks like a kind of interesting sort of way of approaching stuff. But I think a lot of that is how working groups want to work, which is what Jay was sort of saying with the survey and stuff. Some working groups want to do that. Some working groups don't. Some working groups don't even want to use a data tracker, which is kind of scary to me. Anyway, I think that's it for the next slide. I think the only other thing we had, that was it. I was keeping it quick, like I said. These are just some ideas we've been having, and we love to, hear from folks on how to sort of help manage workflow, but also we want to really sort of be transparent about stuff. I think that's the big thing we try to do at the chairs level that sort of gets skipped. And Jay's survey kind of really sort of, that's a good example of like, that would be helpful. So that was all I had. So any sort of, folks are interested. And Jim, I can dig you up some stickers. Don't worry about it. So Jim Fan has stickers.
Any comments or questions?
So
Thoughts?
Yep. I told you I could do that quick.
None, okay. Um, Oh, wait.
Yeah, my only comment, because no one else is saying anything, but I really like the way that he's running that issue tracker. It looks nice, so thanks, Mike. Copy it.
Okay.
Oh, the issue tracker? Yes, it's turned out to be pretty useful. So,
All right, since there is nobody in the queue, this is the open mic, any other business portion of the agenda. Does anybody have anything else they want to share with working group chairs or get any feedback on? All right. My concern about the time running out is not been brought to fruition. So at this stage, if you have any suggestions for topics for future sessions, please feel free to email them to the mailing list or send them to Rich or I. This is your session, so the topics that are, there's the topics you need and the topics you want, and so you need to identify those for us and preferably volunteer to provide them. And with that, the session is adjourned. Please clean up your lunch remains before you leave, because there will be a session in here in 35 minutes. So thank you very much for coming. What was your hump about?
I went quick.
Yeah.
Got stuff done. I was concerned that Jay was going to take all the available time, but we still